This review is of the ASUS Tough Gaming H670-Pro Wi-Fi D4 motherboard. That's a mouthful. And then there are all these things that are features of the motherboard. Oops, I better put it down here so it'll focus on that instead of me. So yeah, let me just read that to you. It's got both Intel compatibility, LGA 1700 socket, and PCIe 5 for certain slots. It's also got Intel Optane. Okay, so there is the Intel H670 chipset, of course. It supports the 12th generation Intel Core processors. I believe it also will support the 13th generation processors. And it's got Intel Optane memory, DTS, as well as, let's see, HDMI, Wi-Fi 6. It's ready for Windows 11, although you can also use Windows 10 and other versions. Linux, Unix. It's got ASUS Aura Sync, and that is for the useless doodads that make it look pretty, like, you know, RGB lights and crap like that, as well as ARGB2 powered by Async. So it's got, you know, Aurora Sync, sorry. So there's technology for you if you want to play with pretty lights on your computer that aren't going to help with functionality. As you can see, I don't have any interest in it, but there are some RGBs that are built into one corner, and I'll show you this corner right here. So when it's on, these are rotating through different colors, and you can actually turn it off. There is a silent mode for the RGBs so that it doesn't have that on. Let's see what else. Well, I can't show you the full motherboard because it's already installed in my case. I've been using it since, well, it's been like 2 months now. But here it is. As you can see, there are 4 slots for RAM. There's the LGA 1700 socket. In addition, we've got M2 PCIe what do you call it? PCIe NVMe slots. There are actually 4 of those. So there's one there, and then there's another one over here, and then there are 2 more over here. There are connectors for SATA, or SATA, however you want to say it, and connectors for fans and all kinds of stuff. In fact, there are connectors for 2 CPU cooler fans, for example. It's got overclocking support in BIOS. So if you're an overclocker, this is going to be great. I think I should have gotten a lesser motherboard. I was not buying this for the overclocking, but I got a good deal on it, and I got it because it had lots of support for additional storage devices and stuff, and that's important to me. I always want to make sure I have enough storage, so I can have lots of stuff saved up on my computer. It's got different kinds of USB connectors. There's the bad one that breaks easily if you're not careful about how you connect it, which is, if I remember correctly, is that one right there. And then there's the really good one that no matter what you do, you can't damage it. Well, unless you're something like that. But if you're just trying to connect it, it's easy. And I'll tell you what, the first time I connected these two, I didn't really notice a difference, but for some reason, after I read the instructions, I had to do it again for mine because my son has the same thing, just a different motherboard, but the same connectors. And I found that this one was very challenging, and this one was very, very easy. So psychological or fact, it does, talk about the fact that it's very easy to damage the pins in the older USB connector. So let's talk about, so this is, I don't want to show you the serial number, but Here's the part number and the Tough Gaming, blah, 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 blah. And let's see, it does have support for multiple languages in the instructions. And on the back, it gives you all the information about the motherboard. So it talks about your back panel input-output ports. So it's got one USB 3.2 Generation 2x2 port, which is Type C. Two USB 3.2 Generation 2 ports that are Type A. Four more that are their Generation 1 that are Type A. There's also one display port. So whether you have a need for DisplayPort or HDMI, you've got your options there. And I don't know why, but it says one HDMI port. But yeah, so is that right? Yeah, one display port and one HDMI port on the back. Don't worry, I'll show you in a minute. One Wi-Fi module, one Intel 2.5 gigabyte Ethernet port, 2.5 gigabyte. Okay, 2.5. I grew up with my first modem was 300 baud. That's 300 bits per second. My second one was 1200. My third one was 2400. My fourth one was 9600 baud or bits per second. And then when I went to Ethernet, it was 10100 or 100-1000. Now, 2.5 gigabytes, which is faster than my Spectrum internet connection. Oh, I'm not promoting them, but just saying. 5 audio jacks, which has got, let's see. It's got the microphone in, line out, line in, C-sub, rear. There's also the SBDIF out connector. And one optical SPDIF out port. So let me just show you real briefly here with hopefully not turning off my anything. You can see right there. It's everything I was just talking to you about. So these are the fastest of the USB ports. These are all pretty fast as well. There's your Type C. There's your HDMI and display port. These are connectors for Wi-Fi antenna. Here's your Ethernet. Here are your 5 connectors for audio as well as the SPDIF out. And all right, back to my ugly face. So that's the first part. Now it does give more information about the USB, the rear USB that I already described. Plus on the front, or in addition to that, there are other USB connectors. Let's see, there is a front USB for a total of 7 ports. That's one of which is USB 3.2 Generation 1 connector, supports USB Type C. Another that's a header, supports additional 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports. So if you buy the double port for that type and you can install it in your computer or whatever, then you'll be able to plug in an additional 2 of those USBs. And then on top of that, there are 2 USB 2.0 headers supporting an additional 4 USB 2.0 ports. Now, that would be the last choice because USB 2.0 is significantly slower than 3.2. But hey, if you have need of slower transfer rates, like if you're plugging in a scanner or a printer or just a ring light or something else that doesn't need high transfer rates, having the additional USB 2.0 ports will be useful. Or controllers, joysticks, and the other kinds of controllers that you can use for playing games. Those would be great for the USB 2.0 ports. but it doesn't come with those ports. You'd have to buy them and install them and plug them in. Again, Ethernet is 2.5 gigabyte Ethernet with tough LAN guard. So the local area network has some protection for it. There's Intel Wi-Fi 6, which is good. I hear that Intel Wi-Fi 7 is going to be much better, but don't know. Let's see. Graphics, I already talked about that. Audio features. Now, by the way, depending on which processor you buy for your computer, it may support graphics by itself. It may need a graphics card. So make sure that when you're selecting a processor, that you select a processor if you don't want to buy a graphics card that has excellent graphics support, especially if you're doing something that's graphics intensive, such as CAD or 3D rendering or video editing or gaming. So like if you are looking at Intel, the ones that have the K at the end have much better graphics support than the ones that have KF at the end, and so on and so forth. Let's see. Audio features, Realtek 7.1 surround sound, high definition audio codec, which supports jack detection, multi-streaming, front panel jack retasking, supports up to 24 bits or 192 kilohertz playback, maybe, I'm not sure. And just to point out to you that if you plug in a cable to a speaker system on the front, and then you plug in some headphones in the back, the back ones will be overridden by the front one. At least that's how it works for me. So audio features, audio shielding, rear optical SPDIF out port, premium audio capacitors, dedicated audio PCB layers, audio cover, blah, 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 blah. And then the CPU is, again, the LGA socket 1700 for 12th and also 13th generation Intel Core, as well as Pentium Gold and Celeron processors. The chipset, again, is the Intel H670. And then the memory. Wow, there's just a wide variety that you can choose from for this. But you get 4 DIMMs or UDIMMs, maximum of 128 gigabytes. And that was another reason that I chose this motherboard, is I wanted to be able to make sure to, should the need arise in the future, be able to really max out my system. Right now I only have 64 gigabytes, but I wanted to have the option of upgrading to 128 just in case. But again, it's DDR4, and there are lots of different options for that. I'm not going to read them all to you. I'm sorry. I'm just going to show you. Oh my gosh, so bouncy. So those are the options for memory. Dual channel memory architecture, supports Intel Extreme Memory Profile or XMP, Optimum 2. Memory data rate will depend on both the CPU type and the DRAM modules, so you need to be careful. Also, ASUS's website, which shows compatibility, by the very nature of the massive array of things that can be plugged into this motherboard, they have not been able to test every single product from every single company to verify compatibility and cross compatibility with other parts and stuff like that. So while you can use their compatibility list to try and verify whether something like memory is going to work on this motherboard, like with my computer's memory and my son's memory, that product was not listed. I got a Patriot Viper Steel for both of us, and neither of them was listed on ASUS's website. They work. Sorry, I'm sick. So just, and by the way, it has to be non-ECC and unbuffered memory. I want to segue just for a second, or maybe more than a second. When it comes to ASUS, I found the customer service technical support experience frustrating. Using chat support, the chat person, the chat technician was so overwhelmed with a number of people he was chatting with at the same time, that he just could not focus on the conversation at all. He would forget that I'd already answered questions and he would ask him again. He would forget that I'd already provided information, so he'd ask for that information, and he just could never actually give me an answer. So like 15 minutes of me waiting for him to answer and then him not being aware of what was going on, I just ended the communication. I had slightly better experience on the phone, depending on who I talked to, but ultimately the technical support was weak. It took weeks to get some information answered. I had to fill out a form and email that in. Why they couldn't just take down the information and stuff, I don't know, but maybe they were trying to eliminate. But despite filling out the form, I still had to communicate some of the information on the form again to the top tier guy who communicated with me, after which I was able to get answers. Some things was easy to get answers for, and other things I got answers after months of waiting. And in one case, I was continuing to get answers after I no longer needed them, months after I was no longer needed that information. And there was another case where I was kind of, that's where I had the chat problem. And then I talked to a guy on the phone who tried to get me off the phone as quickly as possible so he could put it in an email to, I guess he probably has quotas. And his instructions to me were pretty much useless. And eventually, the same day, I got fed up and I figured it all out by myself, how to fix the problem that I was having. But it was exceedingly frustrating for me. And I wrote in detail to ASUS and let them know. And they wrote back and they said, "Thank you. We appreciate the feedback. We're going to work on this." And I hope they do, because ASUS has been around for a really long time. I mean, I think when I built my first computer in the late 1990s, they were around then. And but the bad experience that I had with ASUS's support made me regret buying ASUS products. But I am glad that I was able to buy them on sale instead of paying full price, because they do tend to be expensive, but quality. Yeah. And let's not forget about these 4 blurbs here and the stuff at the bottom there. Okay. So, that aside, let's see, expansions. There's also storage and expansion. So the storage is 4 M.2 slots and 4 SATA 6 gigabits per second ports. Get that? So you can put in 4 M.2 devices and 4 SATA 6 gigabytes per second devices. Intel 12 generation processors. And there are different sizes of the slots. So we've got one that'll take type 2242, type 2260, 2280, 22110. Intel M12 generation processors support PCIe 4x4 mode. Intel H670 chipset. And then the second slot supports 2240 to 2260 and 2280. For both PCIe 4x4 and SATA modes. Then slot 3 supports those same ones plus 22110 and PCIe 4x4 mode. The fourth slot supports 2242, 2260, and 2280 with PCIe 4x4 mode. And there's the 4 SATA 6 gigabits per second ports. So that's all right there. And then the expansion slots at the bottom, which are again the processor. That's not an expansion slot. Why do they list that? That's stupid. Let's see. One PCIe 5x16 slot, so I can get one PCIe 5 device. Intel one PCIe 3x16 slot supports times 4. And 2 PCIe 3x1 slots. So, man, that is a lot. And it doesn't even talk on here about all the overclocking features in BIOS. All right, so inside, obviously, there is the motherboard, and the motherboard comes in the anti-static bag, and I do suggest that you hold on to this bag. You never know when you might need it, if you like decide to swap out that motherboard for something else and you want to resell that motherboard or something else. And of course, it does come with the user manual. It also comes with a driver disc. I didn't happen to have a DVD player, so I couldn't use this. And it comes with a certificate of reliability. And there are also some stickers. As you can see, I removed a sticker, but there are stickers you can use to decorate your case or your motherboard, or both, I guess. I didn't really find much use for that, but I'm sure some people will enjoy using these stickers. Also, when you get the motherboard, the socket for the CPU will be protected by this. Now, when you place the CPU in the socket and then you try to close it, this is going to pop off. Don't worry, you haven't done anything wrong, you haven't broken anything. It's just going to pop off. You remove it and you save it, because if you ever need to, like if you're going to resell it, you'll want to put this back in the spot where the CPU is, unless you're selling it with the CPU, so that that socket is protected from any kind of damage or dust or oils from whatever. You know, you don't want to touch the socket directly, because you can put oils from your fingers or whatever onto the socket, and that can cause problems. It also comes with the Wi-Fi antenna, which is a three-part, or not three-part, two-part. It actually comes, this is separate from this part. I'm not going to take it apart. And then you plug in both of those, or screw in both of those to the back of the motherboard that I showed you earlier. In addition, you get some cables. So there are some SATA cables that come with 2 SATA cables. Actually, was it three or 4 SATA cables? I forget. There are cable ties. There are spacers. There are screws and bolts and all kinds of stuff that come in this bag. So it's got everything you need and probably a little bit extra. Now, talking about the manual, I found this manual disappointing. I don't know if they were just trying to save money, and as a consequence, they skimped on details. There is a lot of detail in here, and most of it's already on the box itself, so it wasn't really helpful. It does tell you what comes in the package and stuff like that, but it does make certain assumptions about your technical level of ability. I had never worked with SSDs before, so I found it a bit confusing about the SSDs. And I found other sections did not provide enough information. So sometimes I was left guessing about certain things, and I just had to, give it a try and see what happened. If you have no experience putting together a computer, you will find that this is going to probably make you frustrated. And in retrospect, I wish I'd done a video of putting together my computer entirely, so you could have seen that, and maybe it would have helped. But there are lots and lots of videos of people putting computers together, so I don't really think that that's ultimately going to be particularly important. So again, when I was talking about this little thing here, this shows what happens when you install the socket. That thing pops off, and you just take it out. And it does explain. Now, if you look very carefully at when you're installing the DIMMs, it actually points directly at the color of the slots that you want, and the color difference between the first rank of slots, or this first pair of slots, and the second pair is not as obvious as it is here. So you do have to pay attention, but you can see it, unless perhaps you have some vision problems. You might have problems, but basically you're going to have they're alternating. So just look at, if you have one stick, it's going to go into that gray slot there, If you have 2 sticks, they go into both gray slots. If you have 4 sticks, they go into all 4 slots, and so on and so forth. I found that the information for the M2 installation was a little bit wanting, but I managed, to eventually get my SSD installed. I did like that on the motherboard, instead of using screws for that, they have these plastic retainers that are located by on one end of each of the slots that make it really easy to, as long as you have it properly inserted into the port right here, that it make it very easy to just put it in place without having to screw anything in. And then there's BIOS, and the BIOS actually not only supports overclocking, but it also supports RAID. So it uses the Intel, what's that called? Rapid Storage Technology. Now I will warn you, and I never figured, and this is one of the things that I contacted ASUS about that they couldn't figure out for me, and I had to figure out for myself. If you are going to use RAID, and I don't have the answer for you here because I never got a straight answer from ASUS, you may experience challenges. If you're not going to use RAID, do not turn on Intel Rapid Storage Technology, because that will assign your SSD to Rapid Storage Technology. It will not be a boot drive. Your Windows installer or Linux installer will not be able to find that SSD. Make sure that Intel RST is turned off in your BIOS. I made that mistake, and I was so confused. Why the heck am I not able to install Windows? And I went through all kinds of stuff, and there were settings that I had seen in a video on ASUS's website that I was supposed to be able to manipulate, and I couldn't find them, or they were grayed out. And and then there was, oh well, maybe it's a legacy device, and you have to turn on CSM. CSM is before UEFI. And here's another thing that pissed me off. If you want to access CSM, you must have a graphics card, or CSM is unavailable in BIOS. So that means if you're having a problem where you need to adjust the settings to use some legacy features, you have to get a graphics card or buy a graphics card to enable those features. And that was a real sticking point for me. But also ultimately, despite all those problems, and oh, by the way, the BIOS, there's almost no documentation for the BIOS. So if you're not familiar with it, you're going to be frustrated. But the BIOS is very, very robust. It's very got a lot of different options in it, and I think ultimately, if you're good with assembling computers, you're not going to have any problems with this. I feel fortunate that I have some background in assembling computers, so it was not entirely frustrating. But I think for the average person, you can go with a less expensive ASUS or other brand of motherboard, as long as it's going to meet your needs in terms of USB and M2 PCIe and NVMe and all that other stuff. SATA. One word of advice: if you want your computer to operate much, much faster, do not have your boot drive be a hard drive. Make sure it's a solid state or SSD drive. The difference between the speed of an SSD and an HDD or hard drive is massive. I mean, I didn't know how much of a difference it made until I used this computer with the SSD. It's everything's faster. Installations are faster, and searching is faster. I mean, oh my God. Antivirus scans. I used to, on my old laptop, I used to take 2.5 days to scan my 1 terabyte hard drive. Now, it's done in like half an hour on a 1 terabyte SSD. So, really, don't use hard drives except for as backups, because you definitely want to have backups. I mean, I'll tell you what, I had an SSD that pooped out of me because I think there was a compatibility problem with my laptop, but it pooped out of me and I lost months of data that I could not recover without spending hundreds of dollars because of data recovery companies do not offer their data recovery services for a small amount of money. They charge a huge amount of money to do it. So I was looking at a minimum of $750 to recover data that I had lost. It was very frustrating because my son and I had been building a couple of Roblox games, and a lot of that data got lost. But anyways, I'd say overall, this is way more than I really needed. But if you're like into overclocking, you need a really optimum computer. And I think, if you get the B660 instead of the H670 or the one that's above this, I forgot the name of it. It's the 680. That would probably be sufficient for a lot of people. Or just look, you could look at Realm of Gaming's ASUS motherboards. You could also look at their regular motherboards. I think honestly, for a lot of people, especially if you're like doing office work or you're just doing low intensity work, non-gaming work, you're not going to need anything like this. But if you're like a serious gamer, you're doing CAD, you're doing video editing, 3D rendering, that kind of stuff, this may be what you're looking for, especially if you want to play around with overclocking. So yeah, those are the facts. I hope that helps you in making a decision. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day. And here is the basic BIOS interface. You've got a few options that you can use. You can change the language. You can search for settings. You can work on the Aura controls for the RGBs. You can resize the bar for harnessing all full GPU memory, and CSM will be disabled, or you can turn it off to resize so that resize bar support will be disabled. And you can see CPU temperatures currently at 28 degrees Celsius. I don't know why it's not set to Fahrenheit. I don't really, but it's fine. 28 degrees is certainly not that hot. And you can see your DRAM, your storage devices. As you can see, I've got one in M2 device as well as a SATA hard disk drive. This is an SSD. And on top of that, I've got XMP turned on, but I have to have this turned off. Otherwise, the system doesn't recognize my SSD as the boot drive because this turns on RAID. You can see some fans that I've got active, CPU fan, optional CPU fan. For some reason, only one other fan is showing up, channel 4. I'm not really sure why, because I've got a total of 5 fans inside my computer. So there should be something for them too, I guess, but maybe it just doesn't work that way. And then there's the AI overclocking stuff, which I don't use because I don't know enough to do that. You can adjust your boot priority if you have multiple devices that are bootable. Or if you want to have more advanced control, you can switch to advanced mode with F7. And then you can do lots of things. You've got your AI tweaker for overclocking. And you've got advanced functions. You've got the monitors. If you want to have your case alert you if somebody tries to access the case without authorization. And you've got the hardware for that. You can you can have that turned on. And then there for boot, CSM is available if you have, and this is for older devices and stuff, if you have a graphics card. If you do not have a graphics card, this will not be available to you. You can also set up your boot configuration here and stuff like that. And you've got some tools. Now you will notice that when you use this, that your mouse will move faster than you're used to. So it will take a bit of adjusting. So you've got your ASUS Easy Flash 3 utility, BIOS image rollback support, and so on and so forth. And let's see, is there anything in particular? You can choose what to monitor and what not to monitor. So you can see the current temperatures of my computer, which doesn't really help when you're actually running the computer with applications on, because you can't see this stuff without a program added to your computer for that. But at least you can see what it looks like when you're only using BIOS, and you shouldn't see weird numbers over here. It should be normal. So if you decide you don't want the LEDs on the motherboard to be active, you can turn them off. You go into Aura and change it to stealth mode, and that will make it so that those LEDs aren't lit up. So you can see right now, there's nothing going on there except for that green LED that lets me know everything's operating normally. If I change this to Aura only, eventually they will turn on, but I don't want that. You can also set them to all on, but right now, until I actually save the settings, nothing's going to happen. And since I don't want those things on, I'm turning them off. So that's a brief look at the BIOS. It's very, very detailed. So if you're a power user, if you're a tweaker, if you're an overclocker, you're going to be really excited about this.